The forest was quiet, but the human could feel something there with him. Every step he took on the dry ground made a soft crunch. Yet behind him there was always another sound, lighter and quicker, like a whisper in the night. He slowed his pace, and the sound slowed too. He stopped moving, and still he thought he heard a breath, faint, almost too soft to notice. The night sky above was filled with alien stars, strange constellations that were not from Earth. The moon here was bigger, brighter, but its light was broken by the tall black trees that surrounded him. Between those shadows, he was sure someone was watching. He had been in hostile territory before, but this was different. This was not the heavy steps of a beast, nor the march of a soldier. This was something smaller, sharper, more careful. He gripped the handle of his knife, his only weapon left after the crash. The blade was dull now, but it was all he had. His heart beat louder in his chest, and in that silence, even the beat felt like it would give him away. He turned his head slowly, scanning the edges of the trees. Nothing. No movement, no figure, just the endless stretch of dark branches. But he knew he wasn't alone. For 3 nights now, ever since he had wandered from the wreckage of his ship, he had felt it. Something in the dark, following his steps. Not close enough to attack, not far enough to lose him. It was like a shadow that refused to leave. He crouched low and pressed his hand against the dirt. If he was being tracked, he wanted to know by what. The soil was damp from the mist, but he found a mark. A small footprint, lighter than his hand, shaped differently, with long narrow toes. Definitely not human. He brushed over it quickly, his throat tightening. Someone was there, and they were skilled enough to leave almost no trace. The human stood again, listening harder. Leaves shifted in the distance, the sound of something moving fast, but then silence swallowed it again. He narrowed his eyes, forcing himself to stay calm. Fear was dangerous here. Panic would kill him faster than any creature. He decided to test it. He stepped forward quickly, crunching the ground on purpose, then spun around to face the darkness. For just a second, he saw it. 2 small glints like animal eyes catching the moonlight. Then they vanished, gone as if they had never been there. A shiver ran down his back. Those eyes had not been beast-like. They had been intelligent, sharp, and unblinking. The human spoke into the silence, his voice low but steady. "I know you're there," he said. "I don't want trouble. But if you come for me, you'd better be ready." His words faded into the stillness, and nothing answered. No growl, no rush, no sound. Just the deep quiet of a forest that was holding its breath. He lit a small fire when he reached a clearing. The warmth spread across his hands, but the unease did not leave his chest. The fire pushed back some of the shadows, but not enough. He still felt those eyes on him, watching from the tree line. He ate a piece of dry ration, chewing slowly, never turning his back to the woods. Now and then he thought he saw a shape move, small, quick, crouching low. Every time he looked straight at it, the shape was gone. Hours passed, and his body grew tired, but his mind stayed awake. Sleep would be dangerous with a stalker nearby. Instead, he sat there by the fire, gripping his knife, staring into the dark. The flames cracked softly, and beyond them, the forest whispered. It was not the sound of the wind, nor the normal life of the woods. It was deliberate, controlled, like someone trained to follow without being caught. He leaned closer to the fire, whispering to himself, "You're clever, whoever you are, but why don't you strike?" He could not understand it. If it wanted him dead, it had more than enough chances. If it wanted to steal, he carried almost nothing. So why follow him? Why watch him for days? The human felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Fear because he was prey in a place he did not belong. Curiosity because whoever followed him did not act like an enemy. Not yet. His instincts told him that soon, very soon, the shadow in the woods would reveal itself. And when it did, his life would change forever. The firelight flickered, and for just a breath of a second, he saw her. A small figure crouched at the edge of the clearing. Tiny, fragile looking, with long ears and glowing eyes fixed directly on him. Then the shadows swallowed her again, leaving only silence and the pounding of his heart. The human barely slept that night, his eyes snapping open at the smallest crack of branches or brush of wind. Each time he thought he had drifted into rest, he felt that presence again, silent, steady, always near. When the dawn came, pale light spilling through the thick alien trees, he was already awake, knife in hand, watching the forest edge. The fire had burned down to ashes, but his fear had not burned away with it. He rose and stretched his stiff arms, his eyes scanning for tracks. The ground was damp, leaves heavy with dew, and at first there was nothing. But then he saw it, small imprints in the mud, so light they almost vanished beneath the moisture. The same long, narrow toes he had found before. They circled his camp, close enough that whoever left them had watched him for hours without fear. He swallowed hard, his grip tightening on the knife handle. Whoever she was bold. He decided not to stay in one place. If she wanted to follow, then let her follow. He set off deeper into the woods, the path winding, the air cold. The forest here was a maze of tall trunks and twisting roots, shadows hiding between every branch. And always, he felt her behind him. At first he thought she might give up, but she did not. When he walked faster, the quiet steps matched his pace. When he stopped suddenly, silence fell too, waiting. It was like a game, one she knew far better than him. He cursed under his breath, trying to think. If he confronted her now, she might vanish again, and he would learn nothing. If he ignored her, she would keep trailing him like a ghost in the dark. By midday, the sun cut weak beams through the canopy. He reached a small stream and bent down to drink. The water was icy, bitter on his tongue, but refreshing. He splashed his face, letting the cold clear his thoughts. When he lifted his head, he caught sight of something across the water. A flicker of movement, the flash of pale skin between the trees. His heart leapt, and this time he did not look away. He fixed his eyes on the spot, daring her to vanish. The branches shifted slowly, and there she was. Small, thin, crouched low like a predator but trembling slightly. Her glowing eyes stared into his, unblinking. Her long ears twitched at every sound, and her hands clutched something close to her chest. The human froze, his breath shallow. She wasn't attacking, she wasn't running, she was simply watching. He raised his empty hand slowly, palm open, showing no threat. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice carried by the hush of the stream. Her head tilted, curious. She didn't answer, but she didn't disappear either. For a long time, the two stared across the water. The silence was thick, broken only by the trickle of water between them. Then, to his surprise, she moved. She reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled something out. It looked like dried fruit, or maybe alien bread. With a cautious motion, she placed it on a rock by the stream. Then she backed into the shadows again, vanishing without a sound. The human blinked, confused. She had been stalking him for days, and now she had offered food. Why? He stepped forward, picked up the strange offering, and studied it. It was wrapped in thin leaves, tied with a delicate string. This was no random act. It was deliberate, almost ritual. He placed it carefully into his pack, unsure whether to eat it or not. But one thing was clear, she was not his enemy, at least not yet. As he moved on, the feeling of being followed returned, but it was different now. Less threatening, more like a shadow that chose to stay near. Sometimes he glanced back and caught a flicker of her ears, the curve of her small form ducking behind a tree. She was skilled, but he was beginning to notice her patterns. She wanted him to know she was there. Not too close, not too far, just near enough that he never forgot. When night came again, he made his camp by a cliffside. The firelight painted the stone walls orange, and his back was safe against the rock. He chewed a piece of ration, staring out into the darkness. And sure enough, he saw her again, just beyond the glow of the fire. She crouched low, watching, waiting, her glowing eyes fixed on him. This time, he didn't speak. He simply set down a piece of his own food on the ground. A silent exchange, A test. Minutes passed. Then she moved. Silent as smoke, she crept forward, her steps too light to stir the leaves. She reached the food, took it gently, and retreated into the shadows. But before vanishing, she looked at him again, longer than before. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes bright with something strange, curiosity, maybe even trust. The human leaned back against the cliff, his chest tight with wonder. This was no simple pursuer, no beast on the hunt. This was someone with reason, with choice. She had stalked him in silence for days, but tonight she had shown him something new. A bond was beginning, fragile as glass, hidden in the dark. And deep inside, he felt it. Whatever she wanted from him, it was only the beginning. The fire crackled low as night wrapped the forest in heavy silence. The human sat with his back to the cliff wall, the flames painting faint orange on his tired face. He had grown used to the feeling of being watched, but tonight it felt sharper, closer. Her glowing eyes flickered in the shadows, never leaving him. For hours she had followed him like a ghost, silent, careful, yet always there. He knew this moment had to come. He could not live in half-truth, stalked by a shadow that chose when to appear and when to vanish. So he set his knife down beside the fire, not in his hand but where she could see. Then he placed another piece of his ration bread onto a flat rock near the edge of the firelight. The air was tense, every sound echoing in the stillness. He waited, listening, watching, his heart beating slow and heavy. Minutes dragged by, but then he heard it. A whisper of leaves, the softest steps. From the darkness, the small figure emerged. She moved low, cautious, her ears twitching at every crack of the fire. Her eyes glowed faintly, wide and alert. Her fragile form was wrapped in strange cloth, rough and torn, like it had been patched many times. She crouched near the food but didn't take it. Instead, she looked at him directly. For the first time, their eyes met in the open. She was not an animal, not a mindless stalker. There was intelligence in her gaze, and something else, hunger, fear, but also a strange hope. The human spoke softly, his voice steady but calm. "You've been following me," he said. "Why?" The alien girl tilted her head, her long ears twitching. She didn't answer in words, only touched the bread, lifted it, and held it close. Then, to his surprise, she set something else down in its place. It was a fruit, pale green, wrapped in a leaf. He stared at it, confused. This was not theft, this was trade. She had given him food in return for his. Slowly, carefully, he picked up the fruit and sniffed it. It smelled sweet, fresh, not poisonous, at least he hoped. He took a small bite, and the taste burst on his tongue, sharp and full of juice. The alien girl watched closely, waiting for his reaction. When he did not collapse, she blinked, almost as if relieved. The human let out a slow breath. "You're not here to kill me," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. The girl blinked again, then stepped back into the shadows. But this time she didn't vanish completely. She stayed close, crouching at the edge of the firelight, studying him as if still deciding. Her presence was no longer only fear. It was the beginning of something else. He wanted to ask more, to demand who she was, why she followed him. But he knew rushing would scare her away. So he let the silence speak. He finished the fruit slowly, keeping his movements calm. When he looked back up, she was still there, her hands gripping the ration bread, nibbling at it with small sharp teeth. The sight struck him strangely. She looked young, too young to be wandering the forest alone. Yet her movements were trained, practiced, almost professional. A child's body carrying the skills of a hunter. The human leaned back, resting his head against the stone wall. The fire dimmed, and the shadows grew longer. He closed his eyes for a moment, but when he opened them, she was closer. Her small form was no longer at the edge of the firelight but just a few feet away. She crouched low, silent, her glowing eyes fixed on his knife beside the fire. His hand tensed, but he didn't move. She reached out slowly, touched the knife's handle, then looked at him again. He shook his head softly, pushing it toward himself. Her ears flicked, and she let go, sitting back on her heels. It was a test, he realized. She was testing him as much as he was testing her. Neither trusted the other fully, but both wanted to. That realization settled in his chest like a weight. She could have killed him already if she wanted. And he could have driven her off. Yet he hadn't. Some strange thread tied them together now, fragile but unbroken. Hours passed with neither speaking a word. The forest whispered around them, but in the clearing, there was only firelight and silence. At last, she shifted closer, her movements less guarded. From her pouch, she pulled another small piece of dried food and set it down between them. Then she looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly, and pointed to her chest. The gesture was simple, but he understood. She was offering not just food, but herself, her trust, her bond. The human's breath caught. He didn't know what this meant in her culture, in her world. But it was no small gesture. He placed his hand on his chest and gave a small nod. Her ears twitched again, and for the first time, her tense face softened. Not a smile, not yet, but something close. The gap between hunter and hunted was gone. Now, there was only two souls facing each other in the dark. The fire flickered lower, and dawn was still far. But something had shifted forever. The stalker in the shadows was no longer just a pursuer. She had crossed the line, offering him her bond. And he, without fully understanding why, had accepted it. The forest grew colder as night dragged on, but the fire between them still glowed faintly. The human sat with his knees pulled up, his knife resting beside him, while the alien girl crouched just outside the circle of flames. Neither spoke a word, yet something unexplainable had settled between them. It was not trust, not fully, but it was no longer fear either. It was fragile, like the thin smoke that rose from the fire, drifting but unbroken. The girl's glowing eyes followed him every time he moved. When he drank from his canteen, she tilted her head as if memorizing the act. When he stretched his arms, her long ears twitched in quiet response. It felt as though she was studying him not just as prey, but as something more. The human could not shake the thought. She had chosen to reveal herself, and then she had offered something like a bond. But what did that mean in her world? He did not know, and that uncertainty weighed on him. The night deepened, and the wind whistled through the alien trees. He leaned closer to the fire, letting its warmth fight against the chill. From the corner of his eye, he saw her move. Slowly, carefully, she reached into her small pouch and pulled out something that glowed faintly blue. It was a crystal, no bigger than his thumb, smooth and shining softly as if it held light trapped inside. She held it close to her chest first, then pushed it forward and set it on the ground between them. Her hands lingered on it for a moment, then withdrew quickly, her glowing eyes never leaving his. The human stared at the strange crystal. It was unlike anything he had seen before, alive with a soft light that pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. He did not touch it at once. Instead he looked back at her. She pressed her hand against her chest again, her gesture slow and deliberate. Her long ears lowered slightly, as though she was exposing herself, making herself vulnerable. The meaning struck him. This was no trade. This was no game. This was her way of showing him something sacred. He picked up the crystal gently, feeling its cool surface. The glow warmed slightly under his touch, sending a shiver through him. He could not explain it, but holding it felt like carrying part of her spirit. When he looked back up, her eyes widened just a little, then softened. She gave the faintest nod, a sign of approval. The silence between them grew heavier, but it was not empty. It was full, thick with something unspoken. The human placed the crystal carefully back on the ground, closer to her. "I don't understand," he whispered, "but I accept." His words faded into the night, and though she could not speak his tongue, something in her gaze told him she understood enough. For the rest of the night, she stayed close. Not at the edge of the shadows anymore, but near enough that the glow of the fire lit her pale features. Her face was small, sharp, and marked with faint scars. A child's body but hardened by survival. She nibbled at the bread he had given earlier, her movements quiet, graceful, careful not to disturb the air. He could not help but feel the weight of responsibility. This was no longer just about him surviving. She had tied herself to him in some way. He had become part of her choice. When dawn came, the fire had burned to ashes. The first rays of light stretched across the forest, pale and cold. The human stood, his body stiff from the night, and slung his pack over his shoulder. He expected her to vanish again, slipping into the shadows like before. But this time, when he moved, she moved too. She followed not as a hunter, not as a stalker, but as a companion. Her steps were light, silent, but steady behind him. The bond had changed something. She had chosen not just to observe, but to walk with him. As they traveled through the twisted roots and thick undergrowth, he glanced back often. She was always there, a few paces behind, her glowing eyes alert, her ears twitching at every sound. When danger stirred in the distance, the growl of some unseen beast, she slipped ahead and motioned with quick gestures for him to wait. Her small form moved through the forest like smoke, vanishing, then reappearing with signals to guide him. For the first time, he realized she was not just following him. She was protecting him too. By midday, they reached another stream, and he bent to refill his canteen. The girl crouched nearby, scanning the tree line, her eyes narrowing as though she sensed something. She touched her crystal briefly, holding it close, then looked at him with a strange intensity. It was as if she was silently telling him, "Stay close, trust me." The human nodded without words. It was strange, but he felt it deep inside. Though they had barely exchanged anything beyond gestures, he understood her in a way he couldn't explain. Their bond was unspoken, yet it grew stronger with every step. That night, when they built another small fire beneath the roots of a massive alien tree, she sat closer. Her small hands gripped the crystal again, and she set it gently in the middle, where the firelight touched it. Its glow mixed with the flames, casting strange colors across the bark. The human reached out and placed his hand near it. Without hesitation, she placed her hand beside his, their fingers not touching but close. It was enough. In that moment, words were unnecessary. The bond had been sealed in silence, in firelight, in trust. And though neither of them knew what dangers still lurked in the vast forest, they both understood one thing. They were no longer alone. The forest was no longer quiet. By the third day of traveling together, the human noticed the change first. Birds that usually sang in high branches were gone. The smaller creatures that scurried in the undergrowth had vanished. Even the wind seemed to carry a strange weight. He had been hunted before, and he knew this silence. Something larger, something more dangerous, was near. The alien girl felt it too. Her glowing eyes narrowed, her long ears twitching at sounds he could not hear. She stopped walking and raised her hand, motioning for him to stay still. Her every movement was tense, her small frame pressed low to the earth like a predator sensing a rival. The human crouched beside her, gripping his knife though he knew it would not be enough against whatever stalked them now. From the shadows ahead, a branch cracked. Then another, heavy and deliberate. Not like her soft movements, not like his careful steps. This was weight, this was size. The girl hissed softly, pulling at his arm, guiding him behind a thick root. Together they hid as the sound grew nearer. And then he saw it. Figures moving through the trees, tall and lean, with glowing eyes much like hers but colder. Their bodies were covered in armor made of bone and hide, their hands carrying long spears tipped with jagged stone. There were 3 of them, moving with purpose, their gaze sweeping the ground. Hunters, skilled and merciless. The human's chest tightened as he looked at the girl. Her face was pale, her body shaking. He understood then. These were not strangers. These were her own kind. They passed close, their feet pressing deep marks into the soil, their eyes scanning. One of them crouched and touched the earth, muttering something in a low growl. The girl's hand gripped the human's wrist tight, her claws digging into his skin. She was terrified, not of predators, but of being found. Why was she running from her own people? He wondered. And why had she chosen him instead? The hunters moved slowly, circling, their spears ready. The human felt sweat gather at the back of his neck. He knew if they stayed still too long, the fire they had left behind earlier might betray them. Smoke could carry far, and if these hunters found the camp, they would know exactly where to look. The girl made a sharp gesture, pointing away. Her message was clear: move now, before it's too late. The human nodded, and together they crawled low through the roots and brush. Every movement had to be silent, every breath measured. The girl was quicker, slipping through gaps like a shadow, her small size a blessing. He followed as best as he could, though the weight of his boots snapped twigs beneath him. Each sound made his heart pound harder. Behind them, a sudden shout rose. One of the hunters had found something. The human didn't dare look back, but the girl's ears flattened, and she quickened her pace, pulling at his sleeve. The chase had begun. They ran now, weaving through the trees. Branches whipped against his arms, roots clawed at his feet. The girl was swift, darting ahead, pausing only to guide him with sharp gestures. But the hunters were relentless, their voices rising in guttural calls. The forest echoed with the sound of pursuit. The human's lungs burned, his legs heavy. He stumbled once, crashing into the ground. The girl spun back instantly, her small hands grabbing his arm, pulling with surprising strength. "Go," he hissed, his voice low, but she shook her head fiercely. Her glowing eyes blazed with something stronger than fear. She would not leave him, even if it meant death. Together they pressed on, breaking into a clearing. The moonlight spilled down, revealing jagged rocks and a steep cliffside. The human cursed under his breath. They were trapped. Behind them, the hunters closed in, their glowing eyes like cruel stars in the dark. Their guttural voices grew louder, and the tips of their spears gleamed. The girl stepped in front of him, her small frame trembling but defiant. She clutched her glowing crystal tightly, as though it could shield them. Her lips moved, whispering words in her language, a chant, a plea. The human felt his chest tighten. He could not let her stand alone. He raised his knife, dull and small against their spears, but it was all he had. He positioned himself beside her, his body tense, ready to face them. The hunters emerged from the shadows, 3 against 2. Their eyes flicked to the girl first, then to him, confusion flashing across their sharp faces. They barked something in their tongue, pointing spears at him. He couldn't understand, but he knew what it meant. He was not supposed to be here. The girl snarled back, her small voice sharp like a blade. For the first time, she looked less like prey and more like a warrior. The standoff was tense, seconds stretching like hours. The hunters circled, testing, waiting for a chance to strike. The human's grip on his knife was slick with sweat. The girl's glowing crystal pulsed faster, its light beating like a heart. Something was coming. He could feel it. Then, without warning, one of the hunters lunged. The forest exploded with sound. The clash of stone against steel, the cry of voices, the rush of bodies in motion. The quiet stalking, the silent bond. It was all gone now. The hunt had turned deadly. The cliffside echoed with the sound of spears striking rock. The human swung his dull knife desperately, sparks flashing as it met the jagged tip of a hunter's weapon. The alien girl darted beside him, her small frame weaving between shadows, her glowing eyes fierce. For someone so fragile in size, she moved with speed and precision that shocked him. Still, 3 hunters against them was no fight they could win. The first spear thrust came close, grazing the human's arm. Pain seared through him, warm blood running down, but he forced himself not to cry out. He struck back with all his strength, his blade scraping along the hunter's hide armor, leaving only a shallow mark. The second hunter advanced, circling, while the third blocked any escape toward the trees. They were being herded like prey, trapped against the cliff. The girl clutched her crystal, its light pulsing faster now. She shouted something in her own language, her voice sharp and commanding. The hunters snarled back, mocking, their glowing eyes hard with cruelty. The human didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They were calling her weak, calling her a traitor. Her face twisted with pain, but she stood firm, stepping closer to him instead of away. The human's mind raced. They couldn't win by force, not like this. If they ran, the hunters would throw spears into their backs. If they fought, the girl would be cut down first. He looked at her, and in her glowing eyes he saw something unspoken. Not fear, trust. She moved suddenly, pulling at his arm, dragging him toward the cliff edge. At first he thought she was panicking, but then he saw it. A narrow path, half hidden by roots, winding down into the darkness below. It was a chance, slim but real. Go, she hissed in her tongue, pushing him toward it. He shook his head, refusing to leave her behind. Her ears flicked, and for a heartbeat she looked almost angry. Then, with a fierce glare, she slipped into the path first, forcing him to follow. The hunters roared, their heavy steps pounding after them. The narrow path twisted dangerously, the drop beside them steep and deadly. The girl moved like water, flowing between roots and rocks, her small body barely making a sound. The human followed clumsily, each step heavier, louder. His boots scraped stone, sending pebbles tumbling into the abyss below. The hunters gained on them, their guttural voices echoing through the dark. Halfway down, the path split into shadows. The girl stopped, her ears twitching, her eyes scanning. Then she motioned him into a hollow beneath a giant root, a space barely large enough for both. They pressed inside, the earth cold and damp, roots curling like claws overhead. The hunters thundered past, their spears clattering against stone, their growls fading as they searched further down. The human's breath came heavy, sweat dripping into his eyes. The girl pressed a finger to her lips, motioning silence. In the tight space, he could feel her trembling, but not from fear alone. Her body leaned against his, fragile yet steady, as though she trusted his presence completely. He realized then what their bond meant. It wasn't words, it wasn't gifts, it was this, survival, side by side in the dark. Minutes passed like hours. The hunters' voices rose and fell in the distance, sometimes near, sometimes far. The human's arm throbbed where the spear had cut him, blood soaking his sleeve. He gritted his teeth, trying to stay still. The girl noticed, her glowing eyes softening. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a strip of cloth, worn and frayed. Without hesitation, she wrapped it around his wound, her small hands tightening the knot with surprising care. He wanted to thank her, but words felt heavy, useless in this silence. Instead, he gave her a nod, and she nodded back. When the hunters finally moved farther away, the girl leaned closer, whispering in a voice that was almost a breath. Her words were strange, but he caught fragments: danger, together, survive. He didn't know her language, but he understood all the same. She pressed the glowing crystal into his palm once more, her fingers brushing his. Its light flickered warmly, calming his racing heart. He realized she was not just giving him strength. She was sharing herself, her will to live, her trust. Slowly, they crept from the hollow, moving deeper into the roots and shadows. The path led them into a cavern carved by water long ago. The walls glittered faintly with minerals, reflecting the glow of the crystal. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the distant drip of water. Here, the hunters' voices faded, swallowed by the depth. For the first time since the chase began, there was silence again. The girl sat down against the wall, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her glowing eyes closed for a moment, exhaustion breaking through her tough mask. The human sat beside her, the crystal still in his hand. He studied her small figure, the way her ears twitched even in rest. She had saved him, guided him, healed him, chosen him. And now, in this dark cavern, their bond was no longer silent. It was trust, complete and undeniable. He leaned his head back against the stone, the pain in his arm throbbing but bearable. The girl opened her eyes again, looking at him. She touched her chest, then touched his arm, just above the wound. Her gesture was clear. Your pain is mine now, your survival is ours. The human let out a slow breath, a faint smile breaking across his tired face. He didn't need words to answer. He placed the crystal between them, its light glowing softly. Together, Side by side, they sat in the dark, two hunted souls, bound not by fear but by trust. And somewhere beyond the cavern, the hunters prowled still. But for now, in this hidden place, the human and the tiny tracker had chosen each other. Not stalker and prey, not strangers, but companions. And together, they would face whatever came next. The cavern was silent, but silence did not mean safety. The human and the tiny tracker sat close to the faint glow of the crystal, their breaths slow, their bodies tired. Above them, the hunters still searched, their guttural calls echoing faintly through the forest. The human knew they could not stay hidden forever. Soon the hunters would find the trail again, and when they did, blood would spill. The girl's glowing eyes lifted to meet his, her face pale but firm. She touched her chest once more, then touched the crystal lying between them. It pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and alive. She whispered words he could not understand, her voice low and almost trembling. But he understood the meaning without needing the language. She was offering him more than trust now. She was offering him herself. The human's chest tightened. He had never asked for this bond, yet she had chosen him. She could have stayed with her people, hidden in their numbers, but instead she had followed him in the dark, risked death to save him. He reached out, placing his hand gently over hers, pressing her small fingers against the crystal. Her eyes widened, a flash of surprise, then softened, glowing brighter. It was done, their bond sealed in silence. They rose together, stepping deeper into the cavern. The path twisted, leading them to a hidden opening where roots dangled like curtains. Through the gap, they could see the hunters moving above, torches in hand, spears ready, their cruel voices carrying through the trees. The girl's body trembled, but she did not back away. She pressed herself against the stone wall, waiting for the right moment. The human understood. They would not run forever. They would have to stand. When the hunters drew close, the girl gave a sharp signal. Her body darted forward with the grace of a shadow, her small hands gripping the roots, climbing up toward them with terrifying speed. The human followed, slower, heavier, but his knife gripped tight in his hand. The first hunter snarled as he spotted them, thrusting his spear downward. The human ducked, the spear slamming into the rock where his head had been, sparks flying. The girl moved faster, leaping onto the hunter's back, her small form clinging like a wild creature. She struck with sharp precision, not with strength but with speed, clawing at the gaps in his armor. The second hunter roared, spinning his spear toward her. The human lunged in that moment, his dull knife striking the shaft, snapping it in half. The broken point sliced his arm again, but he pushed forward, shoving the hunter back. The third raised his weapon, but the girl's crystal flared, its glow bursting like lightning in the night. The hunters froze, their eyes widening. They shouted in their tongue, words sharp with fear. The girl stood tall now, the crystal raised above her head. Her voice rang out, no longer trembling. She was not prey, she was not a runaway. She was declaring herself, bound to him, the human. The hunters stepped back, their eyes filled with disbelief. They had expected to drag her home in chains, not to see her form a bond with an outsider. Her ears stood high, her body small but unyielding. The human stepped beside her, his blooded knife raised, his body firm. Together, they stood as one. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the hunters snarled, spitting words of hatred, but they did not attack again. They knew what the crystal meant, what her choice meant. In their culture, a bond sealed with the crystal was sacred, unbreakable. To strike now would be to defy their own laws. They growled once more, their glowing eyes burning with rage, then melted into the shadows of the forest. The hunt was over, at least for now. The girl's body sagged with exhaustion, her hands trembling as she lowered the crystal. The human caught her before she fell, his strong arms holding her steady. She pressed her forehead against his chest, her glowing eyes dimming as her strength faded. But there was no fear in her face now, only peace. The bond had been sealed, and nothing could tear it apart. They returned to the clearing where the moonlight poured down. The forest felt different, less hostile, as if it too acknowledged the bond. The human sat with her in his arms, her small body fragile but warm. He looked at the crystal glowing faintly between them, its light steady, alive. It was no longer hers alone. It was theirs. A symbol of choice, of trust, of survival. The girl lifted her head slowly, her ears twitching, her lips moving. This time, one word came clear, a broken attempt at his tongue. Together, she whispered. The human's chest tightened, a faint smile breaking across his tired face. He nodded, pressing his hand over hers once more. Together, he whispered back. The night stretched long, but they were no longer alone. Not stalker and prey, not strangers, not hunter and hunted, but two lives joined by fire, by blood, by the crystal's light. The bond was sealed, unspoken but eternal. And though the dangers of the world still loomed beyond the trees, the human knew one truth, clear and sharp: whatever came, they would face it side by side.